it's a different life. It's a different person in this body, and it's hard for me to function when that happens. And that's what I was getting when I sit out last time.
When you think Larry Bird still remembers the faces that pushed him to his limits. The sweat, the noise, the late-game silences, they all return when he thinks about the 5 men he admired the most. Bird was never loud. He didn't talk much, didn't smile often. But behind that quiet stare lived a competitor who respected only one thing: greatness earned the hard way. 3-time MVP, 3-time champion, the heart of Boston in the 1980s, Bird built his legend not just by winning, but by surviving against players who forced him to evolve. Few fans know how deeply he studied his rivals. After every game, he wrote small notes about what each man did better than him. He believed that respect wasn't friendship, it was fuel. One rival taught him leadership, another taught him patience, another showed him what courage looks like when the body starts to break. For Bird, admiration was never about highlight plays, it was about endurance, control, and the kind of intelligence that made the impossible seem simple. These 5 names stayed with him long after the crowd was gone. Each one reflects a different face of basketball greatness: art, intellect, fire, loyalty, and grace. This is the story of the 5 men who made Larry Bird better, tougher, and prouder to play the game he loved. The first name that comes to Larry Bird's mind is Magic Johnson, the man who turned every game into a test of will and vision. Their rivalry was more than competition, it was theater, played out under the brightest lights of the 1980s. Boston and Los Angeles, green and gold, discipline and flair. Magic had the smile that could calm chaos, the instincts that could break a defense before it even formed. Bird studied him like a puzzle he could never quite solve. He used to say that Magic didn't just play fast, he thought fast. Every pass was a message, every move a question that demanded an answer. When they met in the finals, Bird realized he was facing someone who could control the rhythm of an entire building. Magic made basketball look easy, but Bird knew how hard it was to reach that level of ease. Their rivalry stretched beyond the court. It defined a generation, carried the league to new heights, and turned 2 young men into global symbols of excellence. Yet when the cameras were off, the respect was quiet but genuine. Bird admired how Magic lifted his teammates, how he led without arrogance, how he found joy in every possession. Losing to him hurt, but it also sharpened Bird's understanding of greatness. Decades later, when asked who made him better, Bird never hesitated. He would say, "Magic forced me to see the game differently." That rivalry was never just about wins and losses. It was about 2 minds, 2 visions, pushing each other toward perfection. In the end, Bird didn't just respect Magic Johnson, he was grateful for him, because every time they met, the game itself felt bigger, brighter, and more alive. Before the banners, before the parades, Larry Bird had already learned what grace under pressure looked like. It wore the number 6 jersey of Julius Erving. Long before they traded elbows and glares, Bird watched Dr. J glide through the air as if the game was designed for him alone. When Bird entered the league, Erving was already a myth, the man who made flight look effortless and competition feel like art. Facing him in those brutal Celtics-Sixers showdowns of the early 80s, Bird didn't just see a rival, he saw a standard. Every move Dr. J made had purpose. Every dunk carried poetry. But what impressed Bird most wasn't the highlights, it was the composure. Erving never rushed, never panicked, even when the crowd turned wild. Bird would later admit that he tried to copy that rhythm, that sense of calm and chaos. Their battles were intense, sometimes boiling over into something close to anger. The famous scuffle where both men grabbed at each other's necks wasn't hatred, it was the raw form of respect between 2 men unwilling to bow. Bird later said, "You don't really know a player until he makes you lose control." After those clashes, something changed. Bird studied Erving's footwork, his timing, his control of emotion. He realized that true strength wasn't shouting or showing off, it was staying composed when the world tried to break you. Dr. J taught him that elegance could still cut deep, that beauty could still win. Years later, Bird would look back and say that Julius Erving didn't just define style, he defined what it meant to be professional. For all his championships and MVPs, Bird still speaks of Erving with a quiet admiration, the kind that comes only from surviving the same storm. If Magic Johnson was the rival who expanded Larry Bird's vision, Isiah Thomas was the one who tested his patience and intellect. Their battles in the late 80s were wars of precision: Celtics versus Pistons, pride versus persistence. Isiah didn't have Bird's size or Magic's flash, but he possessed something far rarer: complete command of the game's rhythm. He could freeze time with a single hesitation, then tear through a defense before anyone knew what had happened. Bird respected that kind of mind. He saw in Isiah a reflection of himself: methodical, relentless, always calculating. There was tension, of course. The Celtics' old guard against the Pistons' rise, the bruises, the words exchanged, the grudges that never fully healed. Yet behind every glare, Bird understood that Isiah's fire came from the same place as his own: an obsession with winning. Bird once said, he was the smallest guy on the court, but he controlled everything. That kind of control fascinated him. Isiah's leadership wasn't built on speeches but on example: diving for loose balls, staying calm when others lost their cool, turning every broken play into an opportunity. Bird hated losing to him, but he admired how Isiah carried his team like a general who refused to retreat. Each matchup forced Bird to adapt, to slow down his emotions, to think sharper and respond quicker. Over time, he learned to respect the intelligence behind every one of Isiah's cuts and passes. To Bird, that was real strength: not overpowering someone, but outthinking them. Years later, when asked about his toughest opponents, Bird's tone softened at Isiah's name. "He made me smarter," he said. In those intense Eastern Conference nights, rivalry turned into a quiet acknowledgement between two basketball minds who understood what it truly meant to play the long game. By the mid-80s, a new kind of fire was rising in the league, and Larry Bird could feel it long before most. Michael Jordan was still young, still raw, but every time he stepped on the floor, Bird sensed something different. It wasn't arrogance, it was inevitability. Jordan carried himself like someone born to take over the world, and Bird, the ultimate competitor, couldn't look away. Their first true clash came in the 1986 playoffs, when Jordan dropped over 60 points on Boston. Bird didn't see it as humiliation, he saw it as prophecy. After that game, he told reporters, "That wasn't Michael Jordan out there. That was God disguised as Michael Jordan." It wasn't just a quote. It was a moment of truth. Bird understood that he was witnessing the next evolution of the game: the blend of athletic perfection and mental ferocity he had never faced before. What impressed him most wasn't the scoring, it was the discipline behind it. Every move was measured, every drive rehearsed. Jordan's focus was so pure that it reminded Bird of his own younger self: the obsession, the late-night study, the silent hunger for greatness. Over time, Bird stopped seeing Jordan as an opponent and began seeing him as a mirror, reflecting what the next generation would demand. When Bird's body started to fade, Jordan's ascent became the symbol of everything he respected about basketball: the refusal to accept limits. Years later, Bird would recall how that playoff duel didn't end in defeat, it ended in admiration. "He made us chase perfection," Bird said once. To him, Jordan wasn't just the best scorer he had ever faced. He was the living proof that greatness never stands still. Among all the rivals Larry Bird faced, few embodied pure courage like Dominique Wilkins. The battles between Boston and Atlanta in the late 1980s were unforgettable, not for championships, but for heart. Bird knew Dominique wasn't the kind of player who talked much about strategy, he simply showed up and poured every ounce of energy into the game. Their duel in the 1988 Eastern semifinals became legend. Both men scored over 40 points, trading baskets like boxers trading punches, each refusing to blink first. Bird remembered it not as a shootout, but as a conversation between equals, two competitors daring each other to keep going when their legs wanted to quit. He admired Dominique's confidence, his willingness to attack every possession, and his complete disregard for fear. "He never backed down," Bird would say later. "He made you prove you deserved to win." What Bird respected most wasn't the highlight dunks or the crowd's roar, it was the discipline behind them. Dominique played through exhaustion, through missed calls, through nights when nothing fell his way, yet he never stopped believing he could change the game with the next shot. To Bird, that was real beauty, not effortless dominance, but effort made visible. Their rivalry was raw, intense, and brief, but it left a mark that never faded. Even years later, when both men had retired, Bird would light up when someone mentioned that game. He'd smile slightly and say, "That was basketball." For him, Dominique Wilkins represented something deeper than numbers or trophies: the simple, fearless joy of competing until the very end. Bird admired that most of all, the reminder that greatness isn't about comfort, but about courage when everything is on the line. When Larry Bird looks back on his career, it isn't the trophies that play first in his memory. It's the face's magic grin in the chaos of the finals, Dr. J's calm eyes in the middle of a storm, Isiah's calculating stare, Jordan's unbreakable focus, and Dominique's fearless fire. 5 different men. 5 different forms of greatness. Together they built the map of Bird's respect, a blueprint of what it means to be truly exceptional. Bird once said that admiration in basketball isn't about liking someone, it's about knowing how hard it is to be them. Each of these rivals showed him a lesson that no coach could teach: that leadership is earned in silence, that elegance can dominate, that the mind can outlast pain, that perfection demands sacrifice, and that courage is the purest strength of all. As his body broke down and his era began to fade, Bird carried those lessons with him, not as memories of defeat or victory, but as proof that greatness leaves echoes. The rivalry with Magic became friendship. The battles with Erving, Isiah, Jordan, and Wilkins became stories told with a smile instead of a frown. Even now, at 68, Bird still watches the game with the same quiet intensity, recognizing glimpses of those men in every new star who rises. Because in the end, his legacy isn't just written in championships or awards, it lives in the respect he gave and received. True greatness, he learned, doesn't fade, it multiplies through admiration. Which of these 5 names, do you think, stayed deepest in Larry Bird's heart? Tell us your thoughts below, and if you still remember that golden era of basketball, don't forget to subscribe for more stories that keep its spirit alive.